The sea talked all night to the stone. In the hour before dawn, when the candles had shrunk to thumb length and the brazier had settled into a low glow like a beast sleeping with one eye open, Stannis Baratheon stood in his solar and listened. The pitted panes of the narrow windows were rimed with salt, and beyond them the wind dragged its coarse fingers along the ramparts and gargoyles and broken edges of Dragonstone. Somewhere far below, the surf struck and hissed as it drew back, and struck again. The sound of it felt like time itself in his bones, repetitive, indifferent, wearing at all that was said against it. He had read the same letter a dozen times and yet had not finished it. The script was a crabbed, tidy hand, the words stiff with titles. The list of names within was a ledger of the living too bold for their own safety and the dead too late for theirs. He kept losing his place, not because the letter struck him with sentiment. It did not, but because the shape of the iron crown on the windowsill, catching what little light the brazier gave, kept drawing his eye. He had set it there when the last of his household had gone to sleep. It was no trinket but a weight. He did not put it on when he was alone. He had never been one to rehearse his own dignity in private. Yet the presence of it seemed to press against his ribs like a mailed fist. He had ordered his men to hold the lower yard and keep the gates shut. He had dismissed the Queen's men from the tower stairs. He had said he'd brook no torchlight procession before daylight. He had said many things in a voice that would be obeyed. He had not yet said the one thing that would make all the other words a lie. He took the letter by its edges and folded it along the crease that had already been cracked by the damp, folded it again, and laid it on the table where the maps were spread. A red wax seal, broken earlier, lay like a clot where it had fallen. He crushed it with his thumb until the wax flaked into the grain. The door opened. He did not turn to see who entered. There were only 3 people in the world who came into his chambers without bidding. 2 of them he could not bear to welcome in this hour, and the third he would never welcome, whether in red silk or ash. "Sire," said a soft voice that had something of the winter sea in it, a hiss that might have been warmth if one leaned close enough. "The dawn is a dull one. When the sun is dull, the fire must shine brighter. Your metaphors do not improve with repetition," Stannis said. His hands remained at his sides, one fisted, the other flat against the edge of the map, as if by holding still he could arrest the shifting of lands and power that the parchment represented. "I told the yard, no torches. The Lord's work does not wait on the sloth of men," said Melisandre of Ass High. He could feel her in the room without looking. The very air changed. It felt a degree warmer and drier, yet the hairs on his forearms lifted. She smelled of clove and smoke and something metallic, like blood that had cooled. "The hour is auspicious." He turned at last. She stood with her hands folded at her waist, the red of her gown absorbing what little light there was as if it, too, were aflame. She had not drawn up her hood, though the corridor outside had been a cold draft. Her hair fell down her back in a dark copper wave. Her eyes, he had never taken a liking to them, nor to the certainty that occupied them as a king occupies his chair, were on his face and not the crown. "Auspicious?" he repeated, as if the word were new to his mouth. "The hour is auspicious for treason. Then, they came with torches for my child before the cock crowed." She did not lower her gaze. "The king must show his people that the Lord's light is the only light by which a new world can be seen. There can be no morning without the sacrifice of night." He stepped closer, the folds of his plain doublet scuffing against themselves. He could smell the oil from his sword belt, the salt from his sleeves, the faint staleness of rushes. He was not a large man, but the rooms of Dragonstone made everyone else smaller. "We have burned oak and sailcloth and men who took arms against me," he said. "I won't burn the marrow of my own house. I won't." "She is more than a child," Melisandre said, in the voice one uses when pointing out the sun to a blind man. "She is the gate. Through sacrifice, the old, dead kingdoms peel away, and stone remembers how to be dragon. It is not cruelty. It is creation. And you," he said, "are a woman who never bore a child and so thinks a womb is a kiln." Her lips parted. That, of all his words, made her step back half a pace. Just enough. He found he had to breathe deeper, as if exertion had been made. "What you call my pride is a measure of my obedience," she answered, and this time the softness gone from her tone left something like iron. "I have seen what comes. I have seen a darkness like a shoreless sea, and a boy king swallowed by it, and a pale sword in a stranger's hand. I saw you as a hearth in the night, but your flame flickers. A fire that will not feed itself dies. You asked for a realm. The Lord asked for a beacon. You cannot be both candle and hoarder of wax." Stannis thought, "I did not ask. I claimed what was my right." Yet rights had a way of needing witnesses, he knew, of needing men to believe, to bend the knee, to fight under your banners so that your right would not be only a word shouted over the sound of the sea in empty rooms. "I'm not a superstitious man," he said. "I am at war. I am at war and I am your king. See this clearly. There are things I will do and things I will not. I will not feed my blood to your God's appetite." "And if the war is against night?" she asked. "Shall a king keep his daughter whole while his land is eaten?" He could not prevent the small twist of the mouth that might have been a smile or a grimace. "You speak as if the land will die tea. Tomorrow if we do not set my child on a pyre this morning." Her eyes flared, not with light but with attention so sharp it might cut. "The hours are not yours to count, my king." He drew a breath through his nose, slow and dry. "They are mine to command within my walls. And this is my command. The girl will not be taken to the Dragonmont. She will not be touched. Any hand laid upon her without my word will be removed from its arm and burned without the rest of the body for company." Is that plain enough for the Lord of Light, or will he require a written version? Melisandre was very still. He had seen her stillness before only when she looked into the flames, when her face became all angles and judgment, when the heat made her pupils small. Now she was all stillness and no heat. At length she said, "Your wife agrees with me." "I know what my wife is," Stannis said. His voice was a flintstone. Sparks came off it even when he did not mean them to. "And I know what you are. I know what I am. Enough. Leave me. Your grace." She bowed without lowering her gaze, an obeisance as meaningful as a cat's lazy stretch. She turned and went to the door, and he heard the peculiar whisper of her gown's hem over the stone, like the last word of a prayer. He did not move until the latch clicked and the sound of her steps faded. Then he did not move some more. The brazier's red eye weakened. His breath fogged in the cold that had not gone away just because a red woman had been in the room. He had spoken a command. He would make it more than a sound. He took the crown and left the room with it tucked under his arm like a helm. The corridor outside the solar was a tunnel of shadows. Where it widened at an embrasure, a torch pinned motionless flame to a sconce and made the carved dragons along the lintel seem to writhe in orange bands. Stannis went down the stairs carefully. He wore no spurs and his boots had old salt dried on them, and the stone was slick. On the third landing he met a boy partway up, a runner with a livery too big for him and a face full of sleep and fear. "My lord, your grace," the boy corrected, his eyes skittering to the iron in Stannis's arm. They went into the maiden's yard. "We barred the postern, but I told the yard to be held," Stannis said. "Yes, your grace. Only Lord Axel said the queen had given order, and the queen's men." Stannis did not waste breath on a reply. The boy flattened himself against the wall as Stannis went past. The stairwell ended in a narrow door that gave onto an exterior walkway, and there the wind caught him as if it were a hand. He bent into it and took the steps down into the inner yard. Night and day were thin membranes torn by the wind. A handful of figures at the far arch jerked around at the sight of him, their torches curious, fox-bright in the thin light. "Open that door," Stannis said. He did not shout. He could project command like a lance in a tilt. "Open it, and do not let another torch through any threshold within these walls unless I carry it." The men stared. One had the flustered, self-important neck wobble of a minor Florent cousin, dressed warmly and without grace. Another was young and already pitted with old pox scars. He held his torch too close to his cheek, and the heat had reddened his skin to a drunken blush. The third was a soldier who had fought men and winter both and understood a blade when he saw it. He set his jaw and shifted his grip on the torch, but he stepped back from the door's iron bands. "Your Grace," said the Florent cousin. "We only, Her Grace the Queen." "Her Grace the Queen is my wife," Stannis said. "I am her king. When I say no torches, I do not mean some torches. I do not mean a few torches if the wind is low. I mean none. Open the door." The soldier bowed his head and lifted the bar. The wind banged the wood before his hands could bring it back under control, and a sting of rain reached in and struck Stannis's face like thrown sand. He crossed into the maiden's yard. The courtyard was named for a figure carved into one of the great cornerstones, a maiden with a pale, blind face and a garland of dragons instead of flowers. Someone had arrayed torches along the inner parapet, and the orange light made the marble face look jaundiced. There were too many figures. Stannis could always tell, even from a distance, the balance of men who obeyed because they feared him and those who obeyed because their obedience was in their marrow. In the yard there were the wrong kinds of obedience, the eager and the brittle. And in the center, where the wind funneled and tossed, there was a makeshift pyre grown hastily from barrels and broken benches and green sticks that smoked without flame. They had not brought her out yet. For that he was grateful. In a way, he did not have to salt his gratitude to make it palatable to himself. He walked. Men looked around and tried to look around others, as if that could make them see something different than what was there. He saw Celis first. His wife, rigid as a glass of stale water on a cold table. Her mouth a line of denial that had been practicing for years and just now had found what it longed to deny. The wind had tugged her headdress awry and made a wet tendril of hair escape to cling to her cheek. Beside her stood Axel Florent, swollen with importance, his chin lifting and sinking in little increments as if he swallowed his own sermons. "Celis," Stannis said as he came into their little circle of warmth, where torches crowded, pushing back at the event the wind desired. He used her name and did not dress it with title. He did not look at Axel. "Now I know who thinks my walls are their chapel." "Our walls," Celis said, and the slight rasp in her voice made the words seem as if they had been strained through gauze. "Our walls must be sanctified against the dark. Our child is loved by the Lord. The fire will prove it. The fire will prove and why the dryness of wood," Stannis said. "You move to do this without my leave?" She had been ready to speak into a flow she thought she understood. Now she faltered. "Melisandre. Melisandre is not king," Stannis said, and made himself correct the impulse to say it twice. He had learned that in war, a thing said twice could sound like pleading. "Nor are you, nor your uncle. I gave my orders." Axel bowed, thick-lidded. "Your Grace," he said, his tone oiled for negotiation. "You were distressed. It is unnatural for a father. Men are not born to be fathers and kings together. The Lord's will comes to me through what is lawful," Stannis said. "Law is the only will strong enough to bring men to heel. There is no law that permits what you intend." "There is a higher law," Celis said, and the sudden fervor lit her face, as if the torch near her had eaten into her eyes. "There is a lower law too," Stannis said. "The law of my hand closing on a man's throat. If anyone here lays that hand on my daughter, I will enforce that law without witnesses." "You," he said, and pointed at a soldier with a gray beard and a scar pulling one lip down. One of the old, good ones. "Take 6 men you trust. Go to the princess's rooms. Kill any man you do not know there and bring her to me." The bearded soldier did not waste the salute. He was gone, 3 men already peeling from the edges of the crowd to follow, 3 more after them. Celis made a sound like a small bird breaking its neck against a window. "Stannis, your Grace," she began. "You cannot desecrate. This is desecration," he said, stabbing a finger toward the heap of barrels and benches. This is cowardice dressed as devotion. You are doing this here because the Dragonmont is fogged and the wind is wrong. You are doing it because you think you can catch me between waking and duty. You do not know me." He spoke the last as if he were speaking to himself as much as to them. He did not raise his voice, but he filled the yard with it. He could feel the attention of those who had been waiting to move, waiting to be told which way duty went. Tighten. The torches shuddered. Axel found his swagger. "Your Grace," he said, smiling the way a man smiles who intends to quote holy words at you until they sprout anchors. "I know you to be chosen. The Lord." Stannis took the crown from under his arm. He did not put it on. He tossed it. It went in a short, flat arc. Axel flinched and caught it against his chest. The iron bent and bit into his doublet with a faint crunch. Axel stared down at the metal as if Stannis had thrown him a live eel. "You hold my crown," Stannis said, feeling the weight of it. "Do not imagine you know what I am. The next man who speaks against my command tonight will carry that weight tied to his ankle and be thrown into the bay to learn what burden means." The wind used the pause to push its way across the yard again. Somewhere a door slammed like a fist. Axel's smile died. Celis' lips parted and she breathed thinly, as if the air had been removed and then given back reluctantly. Someone tried to pass a torch to someone else and failed. The soldiers returned with Shireen. She walked between them because Shireen had been born under a gray sky and taught to make way in narrow places without complaint. Her cloak had been tossed around her shoulders in haste and hung askew, and her hair was loose, as if a hand had been put into it and pulled once. Pylus, the maester who had replaced Crescent, and how had that circle closed so swiftly, trotted behind, clutching a book as if the printed words within might affirm that he was of use. The guards brought her to a stop at the margin of the yard's light and waited. She was 11 and solemn. The patch of grayscale on her left cheek caught the torchlight and returned it without reflection, dead as rain on slate. She had her mother's mouth, though it rarely had cause to harden so. Her father's eyes, which had never learned to soften for politeness. Now she lifted those eyes to him and waited for him to answer a question she had not yet dared to ask. He had come out with the crown under his arm like a shield, with the kind of anger that wore law like armor. That was good. That would serve. But it was not enough. He walked to her. "Papa," she said, in a voice that did not entirely belong in a courtyard filled with torches and wet faces and the stink of wet wood. He took her hand. It was cold. Her fingers were small, but their bones were like wires, small, hard, and enduring. He closed his hand around hers and brought her past Celis without glancing at his wife. Pylus stepped to one side and murmured something about the damp and about drafts and about a fever if she were kept outside. He nodded to the maester without seeing him and led Shireen to the center of the yard. "No more torches," he said, and the men holding them hesitated. He turned his head and let his gaze rest on each in turn until their wrists lowered with small tremors and their flames guttered. He waited. The yard darkened into a basin of blue-gray with edges of orange, then into a room filled with wind and the breathing of many people. The smoking heap looked suddenly foolish in the dark, a heap of broken chairs and impatience. "Listen," he said, though he had not planned a speech. He did not make speeches. He looked down at his daughter's head and at the place where the grayscale did not meet her hairline, where a small crescent of smooth skin shone as white as a periwinkle on wet stone. He found he could tell the yard what they would do and then trust that they would find a way to do it. "There will be no fire here tonight. There will be no fire tomorrow if it is meant for my child's flesh. There will be no fire atop the Dragonmont if it is meant to turn stone to dragon. If it is men you want to burn for their crimes, bring me their crimes and I will judge them. But an innocent. My blood, no. It ends here." He felt Shireen's hand in his, and then, unexpectedly, she gave his fingers a small, tight squeeze. It was not for comfort in the way other fathers would have imagined. It was not a plea. It was understanding. A seal set upon something decided. He had thought he was not a man who required such a seal. It made him sharply aware of his own breath in his throat. "Uncle Axel," he said into the silence, "give me my crown." Axel approached slowly, the eye whites showing in the torch glimmer like an animal's at night. He held out the iron. Stannis took it and tucked it under his arm once more. "You will go down to the kitchens," Stannis said. and tell the chief cook that I want breakfast made and sent up. It will be for my table and for the princesses. It will be fish if there is fish and oats if there is not, and bread if there is bread. And while you are in the kitchens you will throw that ash pile that was meant to be a pyre into the water barrel. You will see that the men who laid hands on these barrels without order go to the cells and wait." Axel opened and closed his mouth, the flaps of flesh at the corners rubbing against his beard like two parchment pages worried by damp fingers. He bowed. "Your Grace," he said. Immediately, he was gone. His men hurried after him. The torches were lowered properly and their housings snuffed. The air grew colder very fast, as if the yard had been holding its breath and now exhaled in a long ribbon of winter. Celis did not move. "If the Lord abandons you," she said at last, her voice steady and thin as a column of ice, "I will remember this night. I will remember that I begged you to save the realm and you refused for a child who will never wed and never. She is my child," he said, and found himself walking toward his wife as if she were a cliff edge he had to inspect for cracks one by one. "That is the end of it. If the Lord of Light requires such a price of me, let him come take it with his own hand. Until then, I will be the hand that rules here." She set her mouth. It was a mouth built for bitterness and chilly prayers. He had married it because his brother had loved a woman he could not have and had taken another, and Stannis had understood what duty meant and had put his jaw where his anger was. Some days that felt like years ago. The wind tugged at Celis' headdress again. The lost tendril of hair had pasted itself to her throat. She turned away. In the dark that followed, the wind found its voice again, and the sea answered it, and the stone kept holding to the island because that was what stone did. He took Shireen back through the arch, Pylus following with a guilty eagerness to be helpful, and the guards, his guards, around them like a shell. In the corridor, the torches were set reluctantly and at intervals. Their shadows lay across the floor like pieces of broken oars. He felt, once as they climbed, a pressure along his shoulder. Shireen had leaned into him for a step, not because she was weak or ailing, but because the wind outside still wanted to come in and had learned the trick of the doors. When they reached her rooms, the nurse who had been frightened out of her wits and into useless motion calmed at the sight of him. Pylus fluttered to the hearth and coaxed it into a more honest fire. He said he would make a posset of some simple ingredients meant to settle the stomach, as if Shireen's stomach were the seat of all that had gone wrong, and Stannis told him to do as he thought best. He sat with Shireen on the chair by the window and let the damp night breathe through the roundels of the glass. "Papa," she said after a while, when Pylus had retreated to the corner to grind something with unnecessary vigor, "will they be angry with me?" He looked at her. Without the torches and the yard and the wind and his wife, it was easier to see only the child. Her grayscale kept her from some of the abandon other girls had. A disinclination to be touched, a wariness in crowds. It did not make her fearful. When she had been smaller and her nurse had told her, indulgently, that she mustn't go into the inner garden because the gargoyles would come alive and nibble her toes, she had gone there at dawn to test the truth and had come back with scraped knees and a handful of rosemary she had torn from the hedge as ransom. She had not asked for a song or a story that night. She had asked for ink, and had drawn an oddly accurate rosemary sprig on a scrap of paper until she fell asleep with her fingers stained. "Angry?" he said. His voice was different here, where he could hear himself. He could feel the effort in it not to be a blade. "Some will say they are angry with you. That is because they do not dare to be angry with me. It is simpler to scold a child than to refute a king." She considered that. She had a way of considering that made him think of his own mother, and of books on tables and of the smell of fresh wool. "Will you make them stop? When they say things, sometimes I think they believe the saying is a kind of magic. As if the words are stones they can pile up and you will not want to climb over them." "I will make them stop," he said. It was the kind of promise he did not give often. He did not give it lightly. "When they talk as if words were stones, I will make them stop." She nodded as if that had been a problem she had been carrying in her small pocket and could now set aside to make room for another. She set her hand on the arm of the chair and touched the little nick in the wood where a ring had left its mark. The way people touch something when they want to be sure it will still be there when they look away. Is the war very long? Yes, he said, and very stupid, as long wars are. Then we must be clever, she said, and looked momentarily pleased to have found the right companion idea to set next to the other, as if arranging pairs in a row so their stems lay neatly. He made a sound. It might have been a rough laugh that had not learned yet how to be warm. Pylus brought the posset, steaming and smelling faintly of milk and something sharp, and Shireen drank it without showing pity for her own distaste. The nurse fussed with her hair as if order in braids could keep wickedness from a door. When he left his daughter to sleep, he stood in the doorway and looked at her until his eyes blurred and the shape of her face softened and moved, and he had to blink to fix it again in his mind. He looked until he could hear only her breath and the fire and not the wind. He left then. There were men waiting for him on the stairs already. The iron in his words had called iron to itself. He told them what he had told the yard, and added the instructions he had not spoken there. There would be sentries on the princess's corridor now. The grizzled, the steady, men who had cut bread into equal pieces in hard camps for years and knew what fairness felt like in their hands. No one would visit whose face those men did not know. He named names and said who would be sent to the cells and who would be told to pack and go down to a hired ship and leave Dragonstone under the cover of the same fog they had used for their courage. He told a man to find Davos Seaworth. Wine had been left in his solar when he returned there, and he poured some as if it were something he was supposed to do, and then remembered that he did not like wine and set the cup down without tasting it. He stood with both hands on the table and looked down at the maps until the little black lines ran together and the colors faded and the land became a cinder under his gaze. The door opened without a knock. Davos came in out of a draft, shutting it carefully behind him as if the wood deserved respect. He walked with that light-footedness small men of the sea have, born of spending years on decks that could change their mind at any moment. He looked cleaner than a smuggler had any right to look. He had the weary neatness of men who have learned that their only weapon in dealing with the great is their own dignity. His hand, his left with its missing fingers, twitched once at his side and quieted. "Your Grace," Davos said. He bowed, not deeply, not in that theatrical Florence style, but cleanly, and when he straightened, his eyes were as steady as a lighthouse flame that had learned to stand in wind. "You're late," Stannis said, because he always said something like that to Davos upon their meetings. He did not mean it. "I came as soon as I learned what the Queen's men planned," Davos said. "I was at the Lower Quay, talking with San's foul-mouthed cousin about Tar. He speaks 7 languages and swears in all of them, Your Grace." He paused, almost smiled, then grew serious again. "I won't pretend to be shocked they tried, but I am relieved I find you, as I hope to find you. You should not let hope guide your seamanship," Stannis said, and was conscious of the dryness of his tone. "Hope runs a man onto rocks." "True," Davos said, "but sometimes you need the hope to make you leave harbor." Stannis looked down at the crown on the table beside his hand. Its iron betrayed his blackness with dull sparkles where the brazier's light struck it. "I have left harbor. I am at sea now." Davos nodded. "If you hadn't sent for me, I would have come anyway. My wife would not have forgiven me if I'd done less. She believes the child's life is worth more than even your war. She has small use for kings. I told her I would try." "You told your wife," Stannis said, and allowed one eyebrow to show an interest. "You tell her much?" "Only what is mine to tell, Your Grace," Davos said. He lifted his left hand. "She knows how many fingers you took. She knows where I got the onions those days and where I hid them. She knows that you do not forget debts, and you do not like men who offer you gifts and then expect." "Do you expect something now?" Stannis said. "Because the stories men tell say you always do." Davos smiled outright, briefly. "The stories men tell don't trouble me, so long as you know what I expect. This time I expect you to be the man who looks like you inside. I expect you to be the man who does not bend when others bend because bending would be easier and would make you an hour's friends." "You expected me to stop them," Stannis said. "I have stopped them." Davos inclined his head. "And I thank you for it. My thanks are worth nothing. but I give them. Your thanks are worth more than most men's loyalty, Stannis said, and the familiarity of that statement. He had thought it before many times, was like finding a firm rock in a dried riverbed. Sit. Davos sat, as if his knees had only been waiting for permission to be honest after hours of being soldiers. His hands, one hole, one knot, went palm to knee. He had never learned how to appear at ease. It made Stannis trust him more than he trusted men who had learned ease like a song. You will go around the castle, Stannis said. You will find which of my men spoke to Melisandre today. You will find which of them were told to go to the kitchens and bring oil, to the cellars and bring wood. I will know whose obedience is misplaced. If you learn that my wife gave such orders, you will tell me, and you will keep yourself near a door when you do. Davos's eyes shifted once, to the corner where the shadow of the brazier made a dent in the air, and back. Aye, your grace. And if I learn San has been paid to be elsewhere the next time trouble is about, I'll tell you that too. I do not hire allies to pay them to be absent, Stannis said. I hire them to require me to watch them every minute, so I do not stab myself upon them by accident. That is the good of Salador, Davos said dryly. He will betray you in such an obvious way you'll see it coming, as if it were a storm standing tall on the horizon. Stannis almost smiled. Find me which of my own. Men will betray me without standing tall. And send for Pylus before you go. I want to know what he knows, and more importantly, what he thinks he knows. Davos rose and bowed again. He hesitated. Your grace, the Red Woman will not yield. She will push until she believes she is stronger. She has pushed against iron all night, Stannis said. This morning she will learn the taste of it. Davos nodded. He went out. The room felt different with him gone, the way a ship's deck feels different when a counterweight is removed. The brazier hissed softly. A little oil had fallen into it from the pot that warmed above. When Pylus came, he came with palpable relief at the sight of a room with only 2 men in it and no torches in a yard. He held his chain as if to reassure himself of his station. He had never known Cressen's steady patience. He was a young man thrust into an old man's chair. He bowed a little too many times. Your Grace, he said, forgive me. I should have stayed with the princess, but the nurse is diligent, I assure you, and I will return at once when... Stannis cut a small slice of palm down through Pylus's apology. You will sit, he said. You will tell me plainly what you were told today. By whom? At what hour? And then you will tell me what you think of Melisandre's talk of waking stone. Pylus swallowed, swallowed again. Words poured out, at first in a flustered spill. Names of minor household officers, a list like a thin broth, thickened as he went. He had been given an instruction by a queen's man to prepare the princess for a procession at dawn. He had been told to keep her wrapped in warm cloth and to administer no milk or meat after midnight. He had foolishly done as he was told until a guard he trusted had come and whispered rough words into his ear that had made him think of barricading a door with his own body. He had then gone to the nurse and told her to open every chest in the room and make a clutter of the contents as if the room had been robbed. He had sent the cook's boy with a message to Davos Seaworth. Melisandre had not spoken to him today. She spoke to him rarely. When she did, the maester said, he felt that she could see what he did not wish to have seen. He did not believe in waking stone. He believed in rot and salt and fever and bones that healed crooked if not set. He did not say the thing about Melisandre that he wanted to say for fear saying it would make it true. That is well, Stannis said. Keep the princess close for the next 7 days. If a message comes for you bearing the queen's seal, send it unopened to me. If the queen comes herself, open the window and scream. Pylus ducked his head. Your Grace. And do not take off your chain when you sleep, Stannis said. Pylus's hand went to the links at his throat. Go, Stannis said, and Pylus went, relieved to be given the simple work of care instead of the complex work of courage. The morning rose slowly, like a curtain lifted by an old rope. Dragonstone turned the light gray as it touched the battlements. The gargoyles grew faces. The bailiff brought a note from the kitchens showing what had been sent to the king's table. Oat porridge, pickled fish, a pair of rolls that somehow remained warm. Stannis ate half and left the rest for the dog that sometimes found his door and whined. No dog came. He took the crown in his hand and set it again on the windowsill, as if the sea might cool it. When he went down to the yard again, the heap of would-be pyre had been broken into and the wood carted away into honest piles. A man sat on an overturned bucket near the well with his hands tied. He looked sick. 2 others stood beside him with pikes, looking as if they could stand there all day and then some. Stannis told them to stand there until he returned and went to find Celis. She had retreated into a sanctum she had made in her rooms, a place of red silk and charred-smelling herbs and small images of a man strangled by his own fate. Melisandre stood near the hearth, reading a book that had no letters, or else letters that shifted when a common man tried to see them. Celis sat on a stool. She did not rise when he entered. "We will make your daughter a queen in truth yet," Celis said. She had been crying. It made her look younger and more foreign to him. "What you did in the yard will be remembered. That may be enough to light the Lord's interest in our house again." "I do not want his interest," Stannis said, and the truth of it struck him with a low, clean blow. "I want his indifference. I want him to forget that my house exists." "To hide," Melisandre said, not asked, accused. "To govern," he said. "If I cannot spare my own child, I cannot rule." He had been a man all his life who believed that what one could not do was the true measure of oneself. The list of his refusals had been long. He had refused Robert's laughter, refused to forgive Storm's and its lack of comfort, refused to pretend Blackwater had not been a slaughter of his hopes by a river that had learned to be fire. He added now to his refusals, and felt more like himself than he had in months. Melisandre closed her book. It made no sound. "There are other ways," she said, though for the first time since he had known her, he heard a measured concession that contained no triumph. "There are other ways to court the Lord's favor. If any of those ways tread on the princess's hem," Stannis said, "forget them. If any of them require a blood royal, you will find a way to misunderstand your own prophecies." Melisandre's mouth curved, incredulous. "Misunderstand? I have seen 1,000 misunderstandings in braziers and none of them mine. You have seen flames and called them stories. I have seen men who thought they were stories and called them flames," Stannis said. "I will not argue this. I will not burn my daughter." The simplicity of it was almost refreshing. There was a lake in him where Collar had lived, and now that lake lay under a thin sheet of clean ice. "If your lord refuses to follow a king who refuses to burn his child, then your lord is not fit to have my allegiance, and you should go take service elsewhere." "Service!" Celis cried, rising at last, her voice a blade ground on stone. "You speak of service to the Lord as if—" "I speak of service to my house," Stannis said, "which is mine, which is my duty, which is my law, which is my rope and my anchor and my sail. If you cannot bear that, go to the chapel and pray to bear it. If you cannot bear it after praying, then we will be enemies in our own house and we will live as such." Celis looked at him, and then unlocked her hands and let them fall. She did not yield. She would never. She had been born to a kind of faithful obstinacy that would have burned green wood and called the smoke sweet. But she did not now reach past him for the window. Some wars must wait for night. He left them to their muttered comfort, and in the corridor he met Patchface. The fool had been capering along the wall, tapping the stone with a stick as if he sought the spot where the dragon in the rock might feel ticklish pleasure and stir. He stopped when he saw Stannis and swayed. He wore bells in his antlered cap, and at his ankles bells too. When he moved, sound followed like a shoal of little fish darting after him. He smelled of old salt and of something sour. Any man who had drowned as a boy and been brought back had the sour smell. It was as if his body had retained some distaste for air. "King, king," Patchface sang in a soft croon, wagging his stick. "King on a stone throne. King with a bell for a crown." Stannis eyed him, then continued. Patchface fell in at his side like an unwanted thought. "What is a bell?" Patchface asked. "But a crown you can hear?" "A nuisance," Stannis said. "Ding-a-ling." Patchface sang. Ding-a-drown, ding-a-down, ding-a-daughter. They would have rung her like a bell, the red one said. Ring her and the stones would sing. Stannis stopped. Patchface stopped. The bells at his ankles chattered and then stilled. Who told you that? Stannis asked. Patchface rolled his eyes upward as if the answer were written on the inside of his skull. The little crabs, he whispered, as if conspirators might be listening from the eaves, which on Dragonstone they probably were. The little crabs with lanterns. They walk sideways into dreams. Keep to the corridor near the princess's rooms, Stannis said, heat returning to his chest beneath the ice's shell. Not fury, but an urgency the body makes when a hawk's shadow crosses a field. If any man touches her sleeve, hit him with your stick and shout. Patchface lifted the stick. I have a bell, he said seriously. I will ring my bell. He lifted a foot and shook it. The bells on his ankle gave a tired clink like pewter mugs after a long night. Do that too, Stannis said, and left the fool to his patrol. Men laughed at fools and called them sacred because it eased their disgust to pretend there was a pattern. He did not believe in sacred fools. He believed in reliable ones. Patchface, for all his drowning and his far-off mind, was reliable. He would fight a giant with a stick for Shireen. On that, even the crabs in his skull probably agreed. The day lengthened. He kept busy because he had always known that when worry found a man sitting it would stomp him flat. But if it found him standing it might spare him out of respect. He went to the armory. He spoke to the captain of the guards, and to the men whose names he knew, and to the men whose names he did not know and who would remember later that he had asked for them by name. He wrote 2 letters, one to the lords of the Narrow Isles who owed him ships and had been sulking with their sails furled, another to the steward at Storm's End, a letter that said little and meant everything. I remember the taste of siege. I have not forgotten what men owe when they take my bread. He sealed them with his seal and sent them with men who would not stop for warm soup on the way. Melisandre did not return to his solar in daylight. Celis did not come to his table. He ate with Shireen that noon. She told him, over flat bread and salt pork, about a map she had been drawing of the inner gardens, the manner in which the rosemary and thyme had grown into a kind of inland sea, and the way the stepping stones between 2 beds could be a kind of bridge if one squeezed the scale. He listened with the attention he had learned on long winter nights when he had wanted to stop thinking and had used listening like a wedge in the mind to split worry from thought. He asked her the right questions. She ate and answered, serious, satisfied to be taken seriously. He did not tell her that her talk had saved him from thinking about the night. He did not tell her that she had shown him a bridge. In the afternoon he stood on the seaward ramparts. The wind had shifted. It came now from the northeast with a rawness that spoke of ice far off where men with white hair had frozen in place by choice and called it duty. The sea was a mottled sheet. He could see, far off, a ship, a black vein on the water moving slowly with a stubborn patience he recognized. A gull flew past so close he could see the roughness of its feathers, the small nick missing from its wing. He wondered who had made that wound, wind or age, or the hungry beak of another gull, and then surprised himself for wondering. For a moment he let the thought stand. Then he moved on. By evening, the castle had learned what had happened in the morning. Castles learn things the way forests did. Slowly over the day with whispers that were leaves. Men who had argued easily with their fellows at the morning fire sat quietly now, as if unsure of the new rules of air. Women went with messages tucked under their sleeves and then returned with empty hands and full eyes. The kitchen boy who had gone to find Davos in. The pre-dawn came to the yard and sat in the corner and cried by himself until an older boy kicked him and he stopped. The man in the yard with hands tied to his seat had been taken away to a cell with straw and a bucket. The straw was clean. The bucket wasn't. Justice, like everything on Dragonstone, had to be hauled up the hill. When night came again, Melisandre came with it. He found her in his solar without remembering opening the door or letting her pass him. It was as if night had opened one of its pockets and set her down on his rug like a coin. The brazier was hot again and the wine had been replaced, steaming now and scented with cinnamon and something else meant to make men soften. He did not go to the wine. I have come to tell you the cost of what you did, Melisandre said. She had no hood. She wore something darker than she had worn this morning. The color was the color of embers struck by a gust to momentary violent life. You should hear it from a mouth that will not flatter you. I am flattered to learn such a mouth exists in my castle, Stannis said. It exists, she said. You have made law in your court, yes, but the night has its courts too. You have called another judge to look on you. I am not a man who trembles at metaphor, he said. Say what you came to say plainly. I have looked into fire all day, Melisandre said, and her gaze moved past him to the brazier, not to the flames but to the coals under them that glowed like covered eyes. The fire shows me pieces, not whole cloth. It shows me a boy with a sword. It shows me a stag without antlers and a crown sinking in water. It shows me a gate made of bone. It shows me you, standing at a place where wind and snow gnaw at rock, and you are struck in the mouth not by a hand but by a word. It shows me a girl. She stopped and the stillness returned, that unhuman stillness of hers. It did not frighten him. It annoyed him the way a riddle does when you know it can be solved and resent the time it steals. It shows me a girl's hand holding a drawing of a dragon. The dragon is wrong. Its wings are too small. To fly, the wings must be larger than the body. Go on, Stannis said, before he could ask her how she would know the right size of anyone's wings. You have set your face against fire, she said. You must consequently go where fire will not help you. Into cold, into snow, into the teeth of the north. There is a king there who calls himself no king. There is a wall such as the Lord allows men to build to remind them what is beyond building. There is something that gnaws. If you go, you will be struck in the mouth and in the heart. If you do not go, your realm will be eaten. Stannis's jaw clenched once. The muscles there were his truest banners. You think I head north because I refuse to head toward your pyres, he said. It was not your fires that gave me the north as an option. I have been thinking of the north for much longer than you have been thinking of me. I do not think of men as long as they think of themselves, she said. I think of the shape they make in the night. You are a ladder men climb. I wish you to be a tower. The north will need a tower. He considered her very levelly. If I go north, it will be because I need the north, he said. Storm's End is mine and I will have it when it suits me. The city that burned me I will return to when I have the men to take it. But the north holds something else. A wilderness that might be molded into gratitude. If I deliver them from something they fear, they will serve me because they will need me. And there is truth in that is not there when southern lords bow and think of ways to cheat. You plan like a careful thief, she said. You weigh where dogs sleep and who wakes in the night. I am not a thief, he said. You have taken a decree from the night and made it your own, she said. That is theft or rule. Often they are the same. He stared at the map again and did not see the wedge of the north against the great blank that was beyond. He saw his daughter's hand on the chair's nick. He saw the salt in Davos's beard. He saw Celis' mouth as she spoke the word queen, as if it were a brand. He saw, with the stupid clarity of memory, the way patchy lichen had grown on a stone at Storm's End, and how as a boy he had tried to scrape it off with a knife because it offended him that the stone would be anything other than itself. If I go north, he said, my daughter goes with me. Melisandre's face did something then that was not exactly a change, and yet was. She blinked. The cold is indifferent, he said. It will not love my child. But neither will it sing to her at night when I am not there with songs of fire and waking stone. It will not praise me for burning her. It will not whisper that law is weakness. If I go north, she goes, you may come, or you may go the other way to ships and hot places. Do as you please. But if you come, you will not touch my child with your hands or your eyes beyond the respect you would show to a prince of the realm. Melisandre lifted her chin an increment. I do not make promises to men, she said. I make them to the Lord and to myself. Then make this promise to yourself, he said, and keep it because you are proud. She exhaled, more slowly than men breathe. If you go north, she said, the Lord will make use of it. I will make use of it, he said. If the Lord wishes to share, he may. She looked at him a long time. Then she bowed. Not the cat's lazy bow, not the little nod of triumph, but something almost respectful, if respect can be mixed with calculation and still carry weight. She left him, and the brazier made a soft shift, and the room exhaled. He slept very briefly. He dreamed, as men who sleep briefly do, only in fragments. He dreamed of an empty stair down which a woman's shadow fell and climbed at once. He dreamed of a forge that had no smith and no metal, only heat and a notion of shaping. He dreamed of a field of snow that was made of salt. He woke with his jaw aching from the clench of it. In the morning he sent for Davos. "Find Son," he told him. "Tell him there is silver in sailing north. Tell him there will be more if he keeps his tongue in his head and his hands where I can see them. Tell him if he fails me on the water, I will take his ships in harbor and hang him with cord spun of the sailcloth he cut short." Davos grinned at that, a little. "He will pretend to resent the lack of poetry in your threat," he said. "But he will understand the part about silver." "Good," Stannis said. "And the princess?" Davos asked, the way a man asks for a course once he has heard a destination. "She will have a warm cloak," Stannis said. "She will have a place on my ship and in my tent. She will have a guard. She will have her fool. She will have what she needs. Tell the quartermasters that what she needs weighs more than what they think we need." Davos inclined his head. "Aye, your grace. I am not a tender man," Stannis said abruptly, surprised by his own urge to say it aloud. "I will not become one because the wind changes. If I weep, it will be because the wind has made my eyes water." Davos looked at him and saw, as he always seemed to, the man beneath the steel. "You do not need to say that to me," he said. "I know what you are. I do not need any tears. Only orders." "Go," Stannis said, relieved. He went to Shireen's room mid-morning. She was awake and had Patchface sitting cross-legged on the floor, bells quiet, while she drew a dragon on a piece of parchment in a slow, careful way that suggested she had measured the creature with her mind. Her tongue lay between her lips in concentration. The dragon was indeed wrong. The wings too small, the body too barreled. Patchface clucked his tongue and sang under his breath about fish with wings and birds with fins. "Papa," Shireen said, without looking up. "How large are wings? Do you know?" She sounded genuinely curious, and not as if she desired to flatter him by trusting his wisdom. "Large," he said, and then, because the habit of precision is a kingdom, added, "Large enough to make the body look as if it should fall but does not." She nodded and adjusted her line. "I have never seen one," she said. He could hear the small hole in her voice where the wanting sat. "I am not a man who will bring you a dragon," he said. "I know," she said. "I will bring one to myself. In my head, I mean, that is where I keep the largest things. Where else would they fit?" He stood there longer than the occasion required. Patchface began to tinkle one ankle bell, very softly, and then stopped when Stannis's eyes found it. "Wrap your warmest clothes," he said. "We are going to the north." "The north," she said, and looked up at last, the pen held above the page. "With you?" "Yes," he said. "With me." She considered. "Will there be snow?" "There will be too much of it," he said. "Good," she said, and went back to her drawing, and altered the wing again, as if the north wind had already stiffened the parchment under her fingers. By noon the castle had a new kind of motion. The news ran through Dragonstone not like fire but like the turning of a wheel. Men went to their corners and brought out their bundles. The kitchen women packed dried apples and hard cheese and flour. The stablemaster counted the mules with the resignation of a man who knew they would be seasick before they were north sick. The harbor rat who knew all the small ways rope can go wrong went to fetch his needles. Axel Florent carried orders to the lower yard with the expression of a martyr who insists on his chain's brightness. Celis locked herself in her chapel. Melisandre walked along the inner wall and looked at the sea as if she were reminding it of something it owed her. In the late afternoon rain fell, a thin, cold rain that came slantwise. Stannis went down to the harbor to look at the ships and counted them himself. because he had learned a lifetime ago that a lord who takes other men's numbers without counting loses more than coin. Salladhor Saan was there on the dock, wrapped in a cloak that was as gaudy as wealth and as threadbare as expense. He grinned with all his teeth when he saw the king. "Your Grace," he shouted, and the gulls startled at the familiar bellow. "You come yourself to count. Have you no men to count for you? If you like, I will count myself twice, so you have more." Stannis ignored the fisherman's charm in the man's voice. "You will sail north," he said. "You will have coin and right of plunder against enemies named by my hand. You will not leave when the water grows sharp. You will not return to Lys because you grow bored. You will not drink my men under deck. You will not steal your daughter's warm socks," Saan said, putting a hand to his heart. "I will not do many things, yes, but I will sail. The north, it is ugly," he said with extravagant sorrow. "Ugly men, ugly women, ugly weather. I will come back uglier for it. You will owe me for my lost beauty." "You will be paid," Stannis said. "In silver, not in compliments. If you want compliments, you may ask the Red Woman for them. She has a tongue that gives a man praise for a price and then makes him pay it twice." Saan laughed at that. "I prefer my women to praise me without price. It is why I am poor." He eyed the king. "The child, she goes?" "Yes," Stannis said. "It is good," Saan said, startlingly serious for a man whose jokes had paid for his sails in the past. "Better where there is snow than where there is such heat as melts the good out of a father and makes him put his child in a..." He gestured, unable, for once in his storytelling life, to find the word. I say it wrong. It is a word for a thing that should not have a word." "Ship," Stannis said after a moment, surprising himself. Saan looked blank. "Forget it," Stannis said. "You sail at dawn." "I would like to sleep until noon," Saan said conversationally. "You will not," Stannis said. Saan bowed, and the bow somehow had all the insolence of his laughter and none of its harmlessness. "At dawn, then." The night was full of work. He passed men carrying ropes and women carrying loaves and heard words that sounded like the pieces of a song sung by people who had never met and who were nonetheless singing the same song. He slept an hour on a bench in his clothes, his hand on the crown as if it might walk while he dreamed. When he woke, a candle had burned down to the nub and the tallow puddle had hardened like fossilized cream. He rose with a stiffness he refused to interpret as reluctance. They embarked under heavy sky. The harbor water was a pewter plate and the gulls' points of chalk. Shireen stood at the gangplank with her cloak too large about her and looked at the ship as if it were a thing she must politely shake hands with and learn. Davos was there, lifted by function into a kind of simple grace, shrewd with lists and faces and tied knots. Patchface hauled a sack full of bell strings and nonsense. Celis came to the quay and did not speak to her husband. She looked at Shireen and at Melisandre. She opened her mouth once and then closed it. When the lines were cast and the ship began to pull away, Celis lifted her chin, like a queen in a small story who refuses to weep at a gate. Melisandre stood beside her, unmoving, her hair a dark penstroke in the mist. She raised a hand. It was not wave. It was a line drawn under a sentence. The ship moved. Dragonstone, the castle that had eaten a mountain and learned how to spew it back up as gargoyles and spires, slid away into the fog and then reappeared and then was fog again. Shireen stood near the rail with Patchface like a small shore behind her. She lifted her face and let the rain find it. She did not say a single word in happiness or fear. Stannis stood at the bow and kept his eyes on the line where sea met world. He gripped the railing until his knuckles showed. He did not pray. He did not beg the wind to turn kind. He did not ask the Lord of Light to make a path. He was angry with all gods. He was angry with himself. He allowed it to sharpen him. The ship slid forward with a patience that belonged to the men who had trimmed the sails, and to the woman who had climbed aboard with a fool and a posset bowl and the ghost of a pyre behind her. As they pulled farther out, the swell became longer and more regular, like breath after a sprint. Davos came to stand by him. He smelled of salt and rope. "You have a face like a cliff," Davos said under his breath, not as insolence but as a fact. I am a cliff, Stannis said, and found something that might have been humor if he had had the leisure to cultivate it. I have decided to be a cliff. The sea may strike me as long as it likes. Davos's mouth curved. That, your grace, is what it has been doing since you were born. Then it will be accomplished at last, Stannis said. The rain made a fine silver haze. The crew moved. The masts spoke their piece, a kind of wooden complaint he had always found bracing. He stood until his legs understood the ship's new insistence. When he went to find his daughter, she had produced a new piece of parchment and begun to draw waves with little lines, one above the next, careful and repetitive and serious. What are you doing? He asked. Making the sea small, she said, not looking up, so that I can keep it on a shelf and remember how it looked today when it was gray, not green. You can remember without drawing it, he said. She considered, the pen held at the end of a line. I can, she said, but when I draw it, it doesn't blow away. He looked at her and then, for an unkingly instant, he looked at the wet deck at his feet so that the look would not make him softer. Keep drawing, he said, and went to find a cloak against the wet. The days went on like that, gray upon gray, like pages in a book that had not been written yet. There were squalls. There were mornings when the sky lay pale as an old man's eye against the horizon and he could feel the cold sharpening. The way a swordsmith whets a whetstone and draws the steel across it very slowly, very deliberately, until the metal sings. There were nights when the stars came out and lay upon the water like lantern light in a slum alley, and he did not look to find omens in them because he did not wish to give the night any reason to think he would be grateful for its attention. He spoke to Davos and to the quartermasters and to men who would be cold longer than they were paid to be. He made decisions. He enforced them. He allowed no one to speak ill of his daughter and no one to speak for her. He scolded Patchface into silence twice and then found himself, grudgingly, missing the fool's noises when they paused. Melisandre stayed apart. She did not table counsel with the men who put their hands to the ropes. She appeared sometimes at the stern like a figure that had been carved there and forgotten by a careless craftsman. She looked into the sea as if it were a hearth that had been dug upside down. He allowed her to be there. She had made herself into a man's shadow who preferred flames. Here there were fewer flames to feed on. She had no love of wet things. He felt a childish satisfaction that her red silk soaked up the rain worse than a soldier's wool and took longer to dry. Once, near sunset, she came to him where he stood by the mast, Shireen nearby with a book upon which the rain left warping blisters. A king must take his light with him, she said. If he will not take the Lord's, he must take his own. I have my own, he said. You mistake iron for light, she said. I know the difference between heat and glare, he said, and her mouth twitched as if she had tasted lemon juice. The north rose at last, not as a land but as a feeling. Gee. The cold had an opinion now. The wind spoke like an old soldier. The sea changed color, as if someone had tilted a jar of paint and let a darker blue run in. Sans man at the bow, an ugly fellow with a melodious voice, sang in a language Stannis did not know. The words sounded like a prayer even if they meant nothing but, "Do not let the anchor fall on my foot." Then the wall. It did not so much appear as make itself felt. It was a sense of something that refused to be ignored. The sky's low belly, the way the light flattened and then dropped, and then there, along the world's edge, a line that was not line but cliff, that did not cut across the land so much as rise out of it, like the spine of a god who lay down and refused to die. Men began to speak in lowered voices. Shireen closed her book and held it to her chest. "Is that snow?" she whispered, as if snow might take offense and decide to be something else. "It is," he said, and could not put derision into the words as he might have once. He felt, for a brief moment, something that might have been awe. He turned it in his mind like a coin and decided it was not awe. It was respect. He understood walls. He understood the work they asked. He understood, too, what they hid. They docked in the lee of a long stone quay where the water had learned to behave because it had been beaten for centuries. Men with furred hoods and raw faces met them. Men who had less use for titles than Southerners did. Men who looked at Stannis and saw a man who brought his own weather with him. Davos parleyed. The words were ordinary: food, lodging, duty, debts. Stannis kept his face as hard as the wind. He felt Shireen's presence at his side like another piece of armor. Patch-faced bells made delicate, melancholy noises that did not carry far. The first night at the wall was cold enough to make breath a cloud. Hylas fussed. The men cursed and then smiled at their own breath ghosts as if they had discovered a magic trick. Melisandre stood at a brazier and warmed her hands as if she were human. San complained about the smell of saltfish in the stew and then had 2 bowls. Shireen found the seat near the fire and sat with a piece of parchment and drew the wall in lines that somehow captured its refusal to be merely seen. Stannis slept in a tower room with a slit window. He looked out at darkness. It did not look back. He lay down in his cloak and did not dream. In the morning he would be a king among men who did not need kings, and he would make them need him. He would take law and lay it upon their shoulders like a cloak, and they would keep it because it kept them from dying. He would look north and call it his enemy, and he would look south and call it his debt. Before dawn, he went to the yard. The men there were already up and moving because cold taught men that to move was to live. He watched them. He made a list of names in his head because that was how he prayed. He felt Melisandre before he saw her. The air around him turned subtly, as if the wind had met another wind and grown distrustful. She came to his side. For once, she did not open her mouth to drop a sentence into the day. She looked at the wall and shivered once, genuinely. "This place," she said and paused. "This place needs fire." "It will have law," he said. "It will have both," she said, unexpected forbearance in her tone. He considered disagreeing with her just to sand her smoothness, but the work was in front of him and his daughter was asleep 2 halls away with her hand on the wrong dragon's wing. He had chosen already. He had chosen in a wet yard full of torches that went out like insects. He would keep choosing. On the 3rd day, a boy came up from the south road, staggering, the frost in his eyebrows like the sand on a beach that has seen a night tide only half-heartedly. He carried a message sealed badly and written by a hand that had been angry. Stannis read it in the yard under the breath of the wall, and when he had finished he folded it twice and tucked it into his sleeve. He did not reach for his crown. "Your Grace," Davos said, "a lordling starved the peasants under a pale sun and then had the insolence to write me a letter about how they refused to be grateful for their misery." Stannis said, "We will send a rider. The letter will be short. It will say, 'I'm coming.'" Davos's mouth did something halfway to a smile and then decided to be a line. "He will believe you," he said. "He will," Stannis said simply. He went back to the hall where men slept like firewood and where a princess drew lines on paper until they made the shape of her fear smaller. He thought of a morning at Dragonstone when the wind had thought it could make a law of itself and he had made another law, older and more stubborn. He remembered Melisandre's face when he had spoken into the dark and made it listen, and his wife's mouth a thin blade, and the crown in Axel's hands like a nettle. He remembered the fool's bells and the crabs in his skull who had told him a truth in a jest. He held the memory as a lantern in a room where men had forgotten how to see. Outside, the cold had made itself at home, and the north, like a table too large for the room, pressed against everything. Stannis Baratheon stood in the blue light and made himself a cliff. He had saved his daughter. He had lost nothing he wished to keep. He was not a man who would know the end before he knew the next order. So he turned to the men in the yard, drew breath, and gave it. The day took it, the wall kept it, and somewhere deep inside the stone that had never been warmed by dragon fire, something ancient listened, like law listening to itself.